for giving me an opportunity to speak in this event. I'm absolutely privileged and delighted. So to start off with, I would be like briefly going through a presentation, and I would try to address post-pandemic implications of disruption in global supply chain across business. So to start off with, I remember it was 24th of March 2020. All of a sudden, what happened? The government of India declared a national lockdown. Oh my God. So we were wondering what a lockdown is. I mean, anybody, if you, I mean, for a layman and for also knowledgeable people, experiencing a lockdown, I mean, most of us have never heard of it, in fact. So what happened? Within an hour, there was panic buying. Within 2 hours, the local stores ran short of groceries. Nobody knew what would happen. What is it actually? So this was a very unforeseen event. Then, I mean, just 2 weeks, 3 weeks, couple of weeks passed, and I started receiving calls from my friends down in US, and they said, you know what? We are running short of toilet papers. Then in the media, it started flashing out. Supply chain, supply chain, supply chain. So now the term supply chain was no new. From the boardroom meetings to the normal dinner table, the discussion was only about supply chain. If we see, basically what happened is like almost 72% of the global business got a huge negative impact. And this was primarily due to the disruptions in the supply chains. In fact, 17% of business were extremely hit. Perhaps some of the sectors was resilient enough or could adopt this disruption, and that only counted to roughly 11%. You know, every sector, be it like the manufacturing, be it the chemical, be it the entertainment industry, not to mention the tourist industry, every other industry was deeply impacted. And the situation was really petrifying. In a global scenario with a globalized economy, and the world is very very cohesive. Everybody is so interconnected. We are absolutely interconnected. You might see that a design is being done in California for a mobile device or a laptop. It is manufactured in China. The parts are coming from maybe Europe, and the software is getting processed in India. And then it is like added together, and it goes to the global markets. That is how we are interconnected. So one disruption in any of those value chains, in any of those scenarios, would have a catastrophic effect. And that is what we basically have seen for the last 2 years. If we go by the data, almost 42%, almost 42% of yearly profits of a firm can absolutely go into a toss due to this disruption. And on an average, basically, if we see, roughly in every 3.7 years, there is some kind of a disruption in the supply chain, some kind of a inconsistency is hitting. But at this scale, nobody have imagined. So pandemic has, in one way, was an acid test for the global supply chain leaders across the industry. So this is kind of a very new thing, a very new challenge, and the scale of challenge was, mammothean. So this was pretty much like how the business responded. I won't go in details for every sector, then it would be a lengthy. So I will just touch a handful of industries, maybe the industry which was badly hit, just to touch up with. So I'll start with the automotive sector, and I know, I mean, especially Germany, etc. I mean, Europe has been pretty like leading in the front with companies like BMW, etc. So it's pretty. I mean, I think we all can correlate in that sense. So basically, it was a real shock for the manufacturers. First of all, it was real shock. They have never encountered this situation. If you believe, I think by this January 2020, the outbreak was there, and with in February itself in China, almost 70% of the sales got down, followed by US. US, the automotive sector really plunged, and it was like 47% sales were down. And Europe, it's unexpected, 80%. So, like, there were multiple factors to it. But, like, say, for example, uh, the chip production got halted. That, like, across multiple geographies, across multiple nations, like, um, you know, companies like Nissan, Renault, all big players had to halt their production. In fact, uh, a different scenario, but in US, Ford and GM had to halt their operations because, like, the production of COVID kits, COVID machinery, etc., was needed. So they switched on to that. So the production, the car may be sold in US, maybe Europe, but the parts are maybe made in China. So one one impact, and it has got a cascading effect throughout the value chain. I know it's a pharma conference, so just touching the pharma conference in very shortly. I think one of the sectors that got minimal impact, and I would say it was pretty resilient in coming back, was the pharma sector, because need of the hour during when the disease was stuck was the medicines. So pharma sector in that way got minimal impact, but in certain sense it got impacted. So coming to Indian context, India is like a 1.3 billion, uh, 1.3 billion people stay here. So it's a big market, and I think almost 20 billion. The pharma industry would touch around across 20 billion segment by 20 this year itself. So it's a big market. But if you see by history, if you see the history, after post 1990, there was a globalized concept which has hit the Indian markets, and the APIs earlier during the 70s and 80s was produced mainly in India. But what happened during the cost reduction and the mainly the cost parameters, what India did was like started outsourcing, and we won't be surprised that 70% of the API, 70% of the APIs we get from India gets from China. And when the COVID hit, it was really in bad shape. That was a real struggle. Obviously, people, I mean, there was some situations where we like ran short of medicines, and there was, people like started buying different sort of medicine. So there was demand, and the production was halted, and that was a kind of a messy situation. But somehow it got resilient. We bounced back. If you see, there is a paradigm shift in the Indian pharma sector. First of all, I mean, before the pandemic, what happened? The main customer were the doctors. Doctors were the prime customers. But what happened? The salesman, during the when the restrictions were like imposed, the salesman couldn't go to the doctors. So who became the customers? It's basically the normal man. Even if you see by data, almost like the uh, immunity like immunity drugs, or I mean, I don't know if it would be wise to call it a drug, but immunity medicines like vitamin C, vitamin B complex were sky soaring. It was like I mean, people were buying. So in that sense, the profitability of the companies were, I mean, got through actually. Overall, in a nutshell, what we can say on a global scale, also the Asian and Indian context, the pharma sector was pretty resilient. But if you see, say for example, the tourism sector was vitally impacted. There were losses. The hotel industry was in a catastrophe. I mean, it was absolutely a, I mean, bloodbath. Also, we the FMCG like sector was getting huge demands of panic buying and what insecurity and due to insecurity. But what happened was they were unable to supply goods, so that was not also in a good shape. But apart from pharma, one of the resilient sector which came into play is the software sector. Software was pretty much resilient, and the support by the software in the entire software segment to all the businesses is we can applaud about that. That was pretty good. But on a holistic scale, the be it manufacturing, be it tourism, be it mining, be it the chemical industry in India was especially very hit because raw materials were mainly from China. Say for example, Pidilite is a big like firm which depends on chemicals heavily, and it is one of the key players in the chemical industry. And like their compounds, their one of the monomers which is their raw material came from China. And they were, in that sense, the supply chain disruption had hit them badly. And the in that sense, like due to lack of raw materials, the production etc was deeply impacted. So the point is, why this disruption? I mean, we all know that pandemic has hit. Obviously, pandemic, it's unforeseen. All possible ugly combinations to business is what pandemic contributed. But there must be some reasons out of it which forced us in this stage. First of all, we never have imagined the human society. I mean, not obviously human society, but mainly the business fraternity, the business community, and we as a whole, we never imagined that how much workforce is important. When the ports in China got shut down, even in US also due to COVID, the manufacturing was halted. People, I mean, companies couldn't ship their items. The inventory was, I mean, there was entirely disruption in the inventory management, the procurement, everything went away. So it is the person which matters. Now we can realize the health of a man, the health of a person is important. And also, I mean, as I said, this is an acid test. This level of disruption we have never encountered before. And the after the globalization, we are mainly dependent. The supply chain is mainly dependent on just-in-time model. But and what it results, so you have lesser inventory, but at the same time the safety stock, when you reduce the inventory, what happens if some disruption happens? You run into trouble. And that is what exactly that happened due to this, because we don't have another model. So it's time to rethink on that. And obviously one segment of it, you have ripple effect in there, but not to, I mean, One of the primary events is we in supply chain, basically there is a lack of transparency. Bigger companies may outsource it to different suppliers. I have a control on. I might not have their exact figures. In fact, I am outsourced. I as a company is outsourcing, but I don't have exact figures. How much production they are doing. Even they are even outsourcing to third suppliers, tier two suppliers. So there is a lack of transparency, and obviously, like maybe geopolitics or whatever the reasons might be, but it is happening. And the last point, what I wanted to mention, is very intriguing. When the government across different like countries, especially in US, when like the like distributed this stimulus package, what happened? Suddenly, there was a surge in demand. And why there was a surge in demand? The reason was simple. People had money but couldn't go out. Their tourism, their outdoor activities was excuse me, was very much restricted. What happened? Now the result is you sit at home and online something, and you order something online. This is how the demand surged. So this also resulted in a disparity between the demand and the supply. So what is the need of the hour? How can we recover? The solution is simple: is the resilient supply chain. The need of the hour is to build, to emphasize, and to focus on resilient supply chain. The solution is simple. One may say that there is, we can enhance the process, we can go into a process enhancement. But I would say we can enhance every smaller process across the value chain, but that should be driven by technology. Earlier there was a situation when technology was not the integral part of the system. But now what is happening? Without technology you cannot move an inch. And if data is to be believed, almost 92% of the companies didn't halt its technological investment. Rather, it was the technology that saved. So, digital only, not only process enhancements, but I would say focus on technology for a digital road ahead. Digital means you have a competitive edge. You can mitigate disruptions. In fact, you can predict certain level of disruptions. So digitalization is not a need, it's a compulsive trend. From the customer to the companies, everybody is compelled to go digital. So digital is the current trend. We all know for the almost last 30, 40 years, maybe 3 decades, 4 decades, ERPs are everywhere. Every big company or mid-scale company are kind of relying on ERPs or maybe custom solutions. But those days are gone. We need smarter process, we need smarter digital systems. Say for example, any shoe, any branded shoe is launched in a company is posting a photo of the newly launched shoe in the Twitter or Facebook or any social media. Now if you have a smarter system, you will absolutely know how the product is going to do, how it is going to do in the markets, how many likes you get. It might help you to design a system in which your inventory, you can forecast the inventory on these predictions. You can procure enough materials. You can tell the manufacturing how many units. And that would be enabled if we have digital process. And I would say AI will play and is playing a pivotal role, because you may have big data, you have chunks of data, loads of data, but who will analyze it? It's the smarter systems, is the AI algos. More we emphasize on AI algos, more the AI is implemented, the better predictions would be. And more we use it, the more better prediction, more control over different you know nuts of the value chain can be easily done. But the point is, one of the key reasons which cause this disruption and this havoc is the lack of transparency. And maybe geopolitics can be one of the reasons for it, but on a holistic scale, on a broader scale, it's a transparency which lacked. Now the technology is there. If we can integrate our systems with blockchain, with open ledger which cannot be reverted, the company will be on a cutting edge. Because I mean, a company sitting in US can monitor how the materials are moving from different segments, maybe from Europe, maybe from China, maybe from India, any part. How I mean, that creates a transparent flow, transparent process. And imagine a situation, I mean, from I'll again share a small story. I belong to a city which has an integrated steel plant by sale. It's a huge steel plant, integrated steel plant, and we also have GE in here. I mean, GE manufacturing unit in West Bengal, in my hometown. So I asked one of the fellows working there. So can you imagine a work from home? I just asked him this question. He said, "Are you kidding? It's not possible." But imagine a situation if autonomous robotic systems are implemented, and the manufacturing can go to the next level. Then they might come, and in some cases it's also happening, though in a small scale. You can control it from anywhere in the world. That means greater monitoring, greater resilience to disruptions. We are not dependent on workforce. If people fall sick, you still can you know adjust. Last but not the least, one of the key things which is contributing humongously across the globe is the IoT. And you know what, I'll put a data in this way. Around 5 million, I think, around 5 million per day wastage of perishable goods take place in Walmart, USA. And the reason is, the food get the item is perishable and it gets contaminated. So what is the solution? Say, for example, in Mexico exports mainly strawberries. One of the perishable items Mexico exports to US are the strawberries. But strawberry has a very low shelf life. And as a supply chain leader, from a view perspective of supply chain, if there is a delay, you can expect contamination. Shelf life is less. One day you reach the product late, you have to like throw it away. But if we have IoT enabled devices across, if we have IoT enabled devices, then obviously we'll know which stocks are new. We can sell it earlier. That can go in front of the shelf. This is how this, I mean, various like goods can be, saved. Not only perishable items, but every. In fact, I'll come to the next slide where I'll explain how IoT was used for vaccination. So now coming to the, one of the most important examples of resilience was a vaccine transportation across the globe. So I would say the logistics partner DHL was impressive, pretty impressive in that sense. From 4 countries to 220 countries, they have delivered. From 4 countries to 220 countries, they have delivered. And because they had good digital infrastructure. Also, not to mention, I mean, they have partnered with different governments for a great policy framework. UNICEF have helped them, and that is how billions of people across the globe got vaccines. In fact, they set up they had an infrastructure set up at Dubai, which distributed. Dubai was the center, and it was distributed among different nations in Asia, and that they have a very good digitally controlled, you know, um, cold chains. So it is pretty clear that digital is the era. So what lies ahead? The big question: what lies ahead? As I said, and as we have seen, future is digital. For agile, the supply chain needs to be agile. Innovation needs to take place. And innovation can only take place if the processes are digitalized. They're flexible. They are they can withstand disruption. The next point, what I want to highlight is collaborative approaches. And let me put a nice example. Earlier, the big FMCG companies in Indian context, they never cared about how, like, what the supplier does. Only there was a contract with the supplier. And what the supplier used to do, the supplier used to supply those things. But when pandemic hit, it all went into a toss. Nothing was controllable. Nothing was getting controlled. Nothing was there because the supplier itself has a tier two supplier supplier who doesn't have like sufficient raw materials maybe. So what happened? This situation helped the big FMC firm to look to frame contracts which were not only good to the companies but to the suppliers, so that it's kind of a collaborative approach. It was like a collaborative approach uh, to be to mitigate the risk. So collaborative approach is the new thing, that's for sure. Also, we have seen the main chunk of business which severely got impacted are the businesses which are only concentrated across few nations, across few geographies. So from a supply perspective, there should be procurement or the manufacturing unit or whatever it is. It shouldn't be concentrated in a few countries or a few handful of nations. It should be diversified. Diversification is very much needed, because if one part of it is affected but you have plan B, that is how. And this but the question might come, there can be a cost implication. Yes, that can be, but if we go digital, that can be mitigated. Also, the overall the architecture of supply chain needs to be reimagined. In that sense, like, you can have one model for a region, you can have another model on a global scale. At the same time, it can differ in a national level. So we have to reimagine the supply chain. And as I said, and I trusted on the fact that transparency need to be built. Transparency absolutely is a need of the hour. Transparency is very much needed. And last but not the least, there should be thrust on building products that will have the minimal wastage. Wastage should be reduced. and it will not only make sustainable, but it will be good for you know the world, actually, for the environment. Everything will be in sync. So the global leaders, in that sense, needs to rethink on this. So more or less, that is all I wanted to communicate. Thank
Great,
you.
great. So thank you, Jyotirmoy. I think it's a great, privilege to have you today. And I think all our viewers, have really listened and learned about various disruptions, you brought upon this topic, and also how, industry have to collaborate together because of simple fact that, there was things were not, as flashy as it used to be because of this COVID pandemic. Now, I have a question, and there are some questions coming in. If you can elaborate, in terms of, your experience, and I think you have given a good talk today on how do you, foresee the future, it will be fully like backed by artificial intelligence, or there will be retrospective, matching of data, and what's the future, holds like, in supply chain. What is your prediction if one another pandemic like this comes? I hope not, but if it comes, what will be our preparedness?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chatterjee, you have asked. The question is pretty much intriguing, interesting. So the point what I wanted to mention is, see, we are in a stage where AI is developing. We are not in a matured stage. We had data insights for last many decades. Probably we have pools of data. Data is in plethora. It's on great proportions. But how we analyze the data, that is important. I'll give a simple example. Okay, and this is not in context of supply chain though, but it is in sync with AI. If you have seen, maybe in the last 4, 5, or 10, maybe 6, 7 years earlier, the Google Maps used to be very incorrect, right? Google Maps was not that correct, but now you can just give the location and it's very good. Why? Because the AI algos have matured more. They have got the real time data, they have analyzed. But now the situation is we have to go to the next level. Since we have the data, the 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 more we implement AI, the value chain enhances. Disruptions can be mitigated. In fact, in when you do a statistical like predictive modeling, that is good. But when we humans are doing that, can be, at times the prediction can be in a range. But for more accurate, AI needs to be implemented. Maybe the
Correct.
AI algos can determine when the disruptions can happen. The forecasting would be better, planning would be better, and obviously scheduling, execution, and manufacturing, they all would be in sync. And in fact, not only one technology, but a gamut of technology needs to be embraced.
Exactly.
And
Yeah. No.
technology,
Hmm. Wow.
uh, what I was trying to point is we have to integrate it. And since not everything is digital, so we have to, at this moment, we have to rely on manual processes. But the motto should be, whenever we are making it like automated, or whenever we are going for enhancement, physical enhancement, in fact, the motto of a company or firm should be to go to the digital way. And this is how we can mitigate it, I think.
Wonderful. Thanks for the insight. You were telling that in future it will be more by quality by design, something like everything has to work in tandem. And I think you have thrown a lot of insights today. Thank you. For our viewers, who wish to connect with Jyotirmoy, he is available on LinkedIn. So I would encourage, all the participants today, whoever wish to connect with him can connect to Jyotirmoy. If you wish to have his contacts from us, we would be happy to, connect you. So with that, I think I would end this talk. Thank you, Jyotirmoy, for your time today. We remain privileged and thankful to you, and we look forward to having you in our future conference. Thank you all, and we will
My
now
pleasure.
take a short break, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.